All right, we are back on the Hoplite channel yet again. I am your host, Hop, and you clicked on this video because you chose to see Samurai Literature, Miyamoto Musashi, Part 3. This is the final part in the Miyamoto Musashi series, and coincidentally, it is the final part for the Samurai Literature series overall. It's been a long road. I appreciate everyone who gave all the parts a watch. Yeah, there's quite a volume that is stacked up in the Samurai Literature series. So it's been fun doing all these readings over again. I mean, I read some of these books probably 5, 6, even 7 years ago. So it was good homework to go back over these passages and reread what I had written, or reread what I had read, rather than not write these, and go over the segments in these books that had resonated with me when I had first read them, and to share them all with you. Yeah, the Samurai Literature series, obviously these aren't the only books that you could count among them, but these were the books that I had read to familiarize myself with this genre of literature, and I think they're great examples. So we will conclude here with some readings from the Book of the Five Rings to round this out. And for part 3, we'll talk about Miyamoto Musashi's legacy after his death, and what mark he left on the world, on Japan, and the study of Bushido. So let's get to it. First and foremost, we see he left the Hyoho Nitenichi Ryu, which is two heavens as one. This, of course, is his unique style of swordsmanship with the two blades, with the katana and the wakizashi. He made this style famous. It did not exist really prior to his coming on to the scene in feudal Japan. I'm sure there may have been other samurai or Ronin or sword practitioners who perhaps used this technique, but it was Musashi who turned it into its own ryu, its own school, its own way. And we know from modern usage right now, we have a school called Musashi Budokan, and this is in Mimasaka, which is in the Okayama prefecture. So there is a school dedicated to Musashi and this teaching, Hyoho Nitenichi Ryu. So quite a legacy to have developed your own sword style that you made famous and that is currently still being taught today. What else do we see? Well, as we found in the previous sections on Musashi, he told his reader not to neglect other occupations in the world, to not turn your back on the ways of other people in other professions. And he was a living example of this. He actually is known to have crafted several paintings, some of which are quite good. You can look them up online. I'll put a few up here, and I'll actually leave a still of the shrike on the branch that I mentioned in part 1. He also sculpted, and he dabbled in calligraphy. So he was not shy of the arts, the fine arts of sculpting, painting, and calligraphy. So we know he gave that to the world as well. As far as his lineage, we know that he had adopted 2 sons over the course of his life. He had no wife or blood heirs, though. He was a bachelor for the entirety of his life. And I believe one of his sons unfortunately committed junshi after his lord died. So one of his sons committed ritual seppuku to follow his lord into death, which is odd because I was under the impression that the Tokugawa shogunate had forbid this practice. But in any event, one of his adopted sons, that's how he met his end. And we also see towards the end of Musashi's life, he took part in the Shimbara Rebellion, and this was in 1637 to 1638. Yeah, and he was actually one of the commanders in this battle. This is the only existent record in which we see Musashi among the recorded participants in this battle. And what happened is Shimabara is actually in the modern day Nagasaki region. And there was a uprising against the Tokugawa shogunate, probably due to taxes or some other, BS where the government was probably being too heavy-handed. And the Tokugawa shogunate rallied around 125,000 men to crush this 30 to 40,000 strong rebellion. And Musashi went to this battle on behalf of the Tokugawa shogunate, and the rebellion was put down. And about 30,000 some odd people got beheaded over it for their rebellion. And it was actually at this rebellion where the Tokugawa shogunate implemented harsh, strict penalties for anyone practicing Christianity within Japan. And after this policy of Sakoku, which was national isolation, Christianity was outlawed, and everyone who was Western practicing or preaching Christianity was banished. That's what happened after the Shimabara rebellion. But his most important legacy, and again, why you're here because of samurai literature, is the Book of the Five Rings. And we know that he wrote this between 1643 and 1645. And as I said in part one, he died in 1645. And he left this to his disciples before his death. It's believed that around 1642, in 1643, Musashi fell ill. He felt something sinister creeping over him. So he gathered his things, enough of provisions he could take into the wilderness with him, and he lived as a hermit in the hills above his school. And he composed this book feeling as though it was something he had to complete before he died. And when he did die, it was later determined that he suffered from some form of stomach cancer. So over the course of this 2 years, he was suffering with this cancer. He knew it was probably going to end him, but he decided to leave his disciples and the world the Book of the Five Rings as his last gift to posterity, as to what he learned over the course of his life as a Ronin, as a swordsman, and the fundamental style of his way of the Hyoho Nitanichi Ryu. Yeah. So this was his legacy, not to mention his incredible career as a duelist and a Ronin. So yeah, Miyamoto Musashi, remarkable individual. Yeah, he is a national hero in Japan, as I said, to this day. And let's read from some passages to do him some honor from the Five Rings, and we'll discuss as always. And this will be brief. There will be 3 passages, one from earth, one from wind, and one from emptiness. And I will provide the read along. Okay. We jump back a ways to the chapter Earth. And Musashi wrote, "Generally speaking, people make their way through the world in 4 ways: the way of the warrior, the farmer, the artisan, or the merchant. Those who follow the way of the farmer prepare various farming implements, carefully regard the changing of the 4 seasons, and, in this continuum, live out their days. This is the way of the farmer. Following the way of the merchant, the man who makes sake seeks out various methods of production, makes a profit from its good or poor quality, and thus earns his living. In whatever way the merchant takes, he does the work appropriate to him and makes his way through the world by making a profit. This is the way of the merchant. As for the warrior, he prepares for himself the weapons of the various military practices and must sufficiently determine the proper use of those weapons. This is what must be done in the way of the warrior. Without the preparation of weapons and the understanding of the advantages of each, wouldn't the accomplishments of the warrior clans lose a bit of their depth? Following the way of the artisan, the carpenter, for example, skillfully prepares all the different kinds of tools, learns the best way of using each one, takes out his carpenter's square, works correctly according to the plans, does his work unfailingly, and makes his way through the world. These then are the 4 ways: warrior, farmer, artisan, merchant." All right. So you might say that's a little simplistic, that there are only 4 ways in the world. There's the warrior, the farmer, the artisan, and the merchant. But the lesson of this passage is that the warrior's way, the bushi, such as Musashi, is no different from the other ways if you get them down to their basic principles. To be a merchant, to be a farmer, to be an artisan like a carpenter, you have to prepare your tools. Okay, the tools of your trade are what get you by. The carpenter needs his hammers, his nails, his square. The merchant needs a shop. He needs goods. He needs some product to produce in order to sell and turn a profit. The farmer needs to gather seeds, farming implements, perhaps livestock to harvest those goods, those agricultural plants that he has put in the ground and is going to reap as they ripen. These are the things that you must do as an individual coming through your own way in the world, because that is how you show value to society. That is how you derive value from society, what you give and what you take. The warrior uses his weapons as his farming tools, or his carpenter's square, or his merchant's book, or his merchant's store, or his merchant's goods. The warrior's way is no different from the other ways if you look at them simply in those terms, that to make a product or to provide a service, you have to become a master in the methods and you have to have the proper tools. So I think he was telling his disciples there was nothing special in particular about the way of the warrior, because it is one of many ways that exist in the world. And he said there were only 4. However, if you look deeper and perhaps gave more thought, you could find other ways in the world. But the lesson is still the same, that all of these ways have their own individual purposes and their own individual goals, but the means of getting from point A to point B, turning a profit, raising a crop, fashioning a chair or a table as a carpenter, all of these methods, all of these ways cannot be done without learning the way of that art, fashioning yourself in those ways, and availing yourself of the tools that make those ways possible. Okay. We'll jump forward again and move to the chapter Wind. Musashi wrote, "In this world, there are no extraordinary ways of cutting someone down. For those who know, for those who don't know, for women and children as well, there are not many ways to strike, beat, or cut. Other than the method of cutting down, there are only those of stabbing and slicing. Since this is, first of all, a way of cutting a person down, there are not so many fine details. Cutting someone down cannot be done by twisting, contorting, leaping, or opening up. Such things are absolutely useless. In my martial art, it is essential that both body and mind are composed in a straightforward way, and that you bend and warp your opponent, taking the victory by twisting and distorting your opponent's mind. You should investigate this thoroughly." All right. So I thought this passage was interesting in Wind. Wind is, it's more basic. Not to say the Wind chapter isn't useful in this book, but it is the least philosophic of the chapters of fire, earth, wind, water, and emptiness. It is mostly talking about how to use your sword, how to use the short sword, how to position your feet, how to parry a blow. But this passage in particular I thought was interesting in that he instructs the reader or disciple to use his sword to cut down his opponent as a means of bending him. Not to contort yourself and not to shift your own position, but to use your sword as a means of cutting someone down as though you are distorting them and moving them. When I read this, the image in my head, I came back to the scene in The Matrix where Neo is talking to the Oracle, I believe. And it's that classic scene where to bend the spoon, you must realize there is no spoon. And he holds this spoon and he's trying to see it, but see through it and thereby bend the spoon with his will, with his mind. And the oracle says it actually is not the spoon that bends, but yourself. Musashi is saying the opposite. He's saying you are not bending yourself, you are bending the spoon. It's kind of the inverse of that message in the Matrix. It is not the spoon that bends, it is you. Musashi is saying that's nonsense. You bend the spoon. You are the carrier of the tool, the sword. You do not contort yourself to accommodate your opponent, your target, the thing you're attacking. You make it bend to your will. You do not contort yourself for its sake. So I thought that was interesting. The analogy of bending the spoon. There is no spoon, right? Okay, let's move to the last passage, and this will be in emptiness. This will be a good conclusion to the series here. This is on the 111th page. Musashi wrote, "The heart of emptiness is in the absence of anything with form, and the inability to have knowledge thereof. This I see as emptiness. Emptiness, of course, is nothingness. Knowing the existent, you know the non-existent. This exactly is emptiness. To be in the world and see things poorly, to be unable to distinguish one matter from another, and to regard this as emptiness, this is not the true emptiness. All that is just the mind of confusion. When you are on the way of the martial arts, you may perform this way as a warrior. But if you are ignorant of the warrior's practices, you will not abide in emptiness. You will be confused, and you will not do the things that you should. Though this term you term this emptiness, it will not be the true emptiness. A warrior learns the way of the martial arts with certainty, makes strong efforts in other martial accomplishments, and is not in the least bit in the dark about the way of conducting himself as a warrior. He has no confusion in his mind and is never lazy at any moment of the day. He polishes the two hearts of his mind and will, and sharpens the two eyes of broad observation and focused vision. He is not the least bit clouded, but rather clears away the clouds of confusion. You should know that this is true emptiness." Okay. So yeah, this final chapter, which I said is probably about 4 pages or 3 pages, this is very philosophic. This goes back to the section I did on Takawan Soho's the mind of no mind, right? So in the Zen Buddhist tradition, the mind of no mind is the mind that refuses to abide in one place. It is the mind that does not cease in one motion or one activity or one thought or one understanding or one truth. The truth of the mind of no mind is that there is no constant truth. You are constantly questioning what is true and what is false. You are never settling yourself on one emotion, one idea, one thought, one action. Your mind is in perfect stasis by being in perfect motion. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but this is the teaching of Zen Buddhism for the mind of no mind, for the mind that does not abide in the place of comfort, in the place of pretending that it knows and that it is content in its knowledge, because once that place is found, the abiding place, no longer will enlightenment be attainable. And enlightenment is simply the journey of questioning everything that is truth and then moving from one truth to the next. And this cycle is never ending. Musashi is saying that you must have the mind of emptiness in that it is clarity of thought. You do not question things beyond what is perceived by your heart and your mind and your will. This will cloud your mind if you constantly second guess yourself, if you do not know who you are, where you are going, and what is around you in the world. What is your capability? What is your opponent's capability? What are your allies' capabilities? Will you live? Will you die? Don't think about these things. These are the things that cloud your mind and keep you from moving from one place to the next. Because these are stop signs, or these are detours that if you let your mind take those roads or follow the instructions of those stop signs, you will never reach enlightenment. You will never have the ability to attain the next goal, because these constant interruptions of rhythm, these constant stutters in motion will prohibit you from keeping the mind of emptiness. And he's not saying emptiness in a negative way, even though to a Western reader it may sound that such. The emptiness of thought is the ability to be a blank slate and to take things as a Stoic would when they come to you as they come to you. And to not have any misgivings or impressions or desires or aversions, because when you harbor these pre-existing thoughts in your mind, you cannot say you have the mind of emptiness. And the mind of emptiness is what a warrior must have in every situation, especially in terms of life and death, if he hopes to succeed. Right? The mind of no mind, the mind of emptiness. Okay, yeah, we started with Takawan Soho, and we came full circle right back to Musashi. Great. So that concludes Miyamoto Musashi. This is part 3 for him, and this is the final part in the Samurai Literature series. I want to thank everybody for being here for the duration, if you were. It's been fun for me. Like I said, reading these books after so many years of having read them, I felt like I was reading them again for the first time. So if it was your first time hearing about these works, or if you were like me, you read them years ago, and this is kind of rekindling your interest in them, that's great. I consider this a mission accomplished if that's what happened. But anyway, if you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you like the channel, please go ahead and subscribe for more content. If you want to share it with family and friends, anyone you think might like this series or just want to hear more about Musashi, that's great. I'm going to segue away from more of the Eastern schools of thought and maybe move back into more Western schools of thought. Or I might jump into current events. I don't know yet. I haven't really mapped out the course of this channel. I'm going to keep the mind of emptiness for the time being. But anyway, I appreciate your attention for this one. I do hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time, whenever that may be. Till then, take care.